so here we are with the original image, and we're just going to look at a couple of things you may want to do to your photos before you start retouching them. So some typical things that you may want to improve are things like exposure, contrast, even a little bit of sharpening. So one way that we can improve the clarity of an image is by adding an unsharp mask. Now we can do this directly to the layer, or you can turn the layer into a smart object and apply the unsharp mask to the layer as a smart object. And that's a non-destructive way of using a filter on a layer. So to turn it into a smart object in the layers panel, if I come across and I can actually just select the layer and right click on convert to smart object. That'll basically create a smart object out of the layer, and you'll know that it's happened because you'll see this little thumbnail in the lower right hand corner to tell you that the layer is now a smart object. So now if I come up to my filter menu and then come down to where I've got my sharpen options, a common sharpen filter is the unsharp mask, and I'll click on that one there. It opens up my unsharp mask window, and if I've got preview ticked here, I can actually see the mask running in the background. If you find it slows your computer down by having that on, you may want to turn that off and then just focus on this window that is our preview window. Probably want to go to something that has a lot of detail, such as the eyes or the hair, and have a look at the effect the mask is having, the effect the filter is having on that. Usually the amount and the radius is what we are going to adjust. You want to make sure that we've got the amount set at around 100% and the radius anywhere from 1 to 2, and then start from there. Now that's helping add a little bit more pop to the image. You'll find that if you push the amount up further or the radius up further, like getting up to 3 or 4, you might find that it actually looks a little bit too sharp. You get some artifacts sort of happening around the details. So on an image that's already looking nice and sharp, you only really need to use a low radius and the amount at about 100%. So anywhere from 100%, and then with the radius anywhere from 1 to 2. The threshold you can keep at 0. We don't need to use threshold unless we push these amounts up. All right, so now that I've done that, I can click OK, and we can see that by adding that filter, it hasn't done it directly on the layer. Instead, we've got this smart filter that exists underneath the layer, which I can always come in and turn off if I want, or turn back on again to reveal the effect. Cool, so one other thing that you may want to do with your image is to adjust the brightness and the contrast. Now, we would want to do that on an adjustment layer, and we can do that by coming over to our adjustments panel that we've got here, and across the top we can see that we've got a brightness and contrast adjustment there, a levels, there's a curves layer. Curves adjustments are a good way to add more dynamic range to the image, so I'll click on the curves adjustment, and that adds the curves directly above my original layer. It also opens up the properties that relate to that particular adjustment. So essentially what we've got here is a histogram of the RGB red, green and blue pixels within the image, and we've got our shadows down here and our highlights up here and our midtones in the middle. Now if you wanted to add more contrast, then a common thing to do is to create an S-curve out of this line that we've got running across here. So I could click on the highlight areas and just drag them up, and then I can come down to the shadows and click once on the shadow area and pull that down to create this S. Now you can see how that's creating more dynamic range, more contrast within the image. But this particular image is pretty high contrast anyway, so I probably wouldn't worry about adding a S-curve to my histogram for an adjustment layer within the curves, but this is just an example of what you may need to do with an image that's maybe looking a little bit flat. Adding an S-curve can always help with that. So what I'll do is I'll come back to my layers panel where I've got that curves adjustment layer, and I'm just going to drag that down into the trash because I won't actually apply it to this image. So there are a couple of things you may want to do to the image before you begin the retouching process.